Hi, I'm Mark, producer of Roundtable, the TV series born here in New York City at the legendary Manhattan Neighborhood Network Studios. The exchange of ideas is important, and that is why we bring to you the following presentation. Please watch.
Good evening, and welcome to Single Shot Show at Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Roundtable. Tonight we're going to be talking about the most important concept in photography, about the concept of time. And to discuss it, we invited a photographer, Xan Padron, who recently rocked a couple of fairs in New York with very special photographs he's taking, and they based all around the concept of time and time passage. Hello, Xan, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Having me. Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about your photographs, what you do, and how they work. Let's start with what actually is pictured there.
Okay. So basically this project that I'm working on now, it's called time-lapse. But time-lapse like in a classic sense of the time lapses, you know,
Yes.
which is exactly a moment in time. So to give it a little bit of background on it, before this project I did a project called Motion City, in which I was shooting from a public bus in New York with low speed exposures, so I could get people in motion, and I was moving all around the city taking the pictures. But at some point I found a very interesting corner, and I thought, how can I represent what happens in this specific moment, in this specific place during a moment of time? And that's how I came up with the idea of working the way I work with the time lapses, which is basically I am static on a single spot, not moving with my camera. I find a nice background that I can repeat many times, and I just let things happen in front of me. Take several pictures, normally between 25 and 50, and then place one picture next to each other. It's like saying, this is what happened in a random moment, in a random place, with just random people.
Wow, your works actually have so many dimensions that making them special that I don't even know where to start. So I will start from rather unusual angle. They actually remind me of a very specific direction in painting, where the repetitive patterns was actually creating something cohesive as one piece, but yet each piece of the pattern would be something individual and separate, and in a way it symbolizes the whole humanity, especially if it's people figured, pictured.
Yeah, and I'm basically interested in people. My idea, even though I'm trying to recreate places, because my work happens in cities all around the world and the 5 continents, what I'm interested in is to give actually an idea of the city through the people I photograph. So what I try to do is try to reflect the way they move, the way they dress, the sense of purpose of the people that you can see. You know, if you see one of my time lapses, for example, in Cuba, you will see how the posture, the gesture of people is completely different. The one I took, for example, in Sydney or in New York, people behave, dress, walk in a very, very different way.
Oh, naturally. And where the project actually started geographically? What was the first place you photographed?
The first place I photographed was actually here in New York City, in the West Village, in 2011. That's actually my first time lapse. And it was a snowy day, and that was exactly the moment that I was trying to come up with something that work aesthetically and at the same time with the concept and behind, with the time.
Oh. So yes, this does represent the passage of time, and we do look at people, but what would be your criteria for selecting the specific people you would want to include in this work? Because I would imagine that if you're doing it for a long enough time, there are hundreds, if not thousands, people passing in front of your camera. What is the reason for you to actually make the choice to picture this particular individual?
There's not a, I don't have like a criteria. No? I don't distinguish by gender, race, anything. What I'm trying to reflect is exactly what happened. So I try to be as, let's say, chronological as I can, and I try to put the frames or the images in the most accurate manner. But sometimes, you know, for aesthetic purposes, if you get in one of my lines, if you get all the people walking in the same direction, I can change this guy on the left and put it on the right. But basically, at the beginning of the image, which is the top left part of the image, is the beginning of the shooting, and the bottom right is the end of the shooting.
Oh, so it's also in chronological order.
Almost chronological. I mean, there's some changes, but what I can tell you is that the beginning are the photos from the beginning. You can change one here from there, but not
naturally,
a lot.
yeah.
Not a lot.
But as I understand, it does have in a way significance for you, the specific fact that they are actually in the order they was received.
Yeah, because when I started this in 2011, I mean, there were no pretensions at all. My only idea was, I like to think about these time lapses as a kind of a sociological mini study of cities. You know? In a moment, that's what happened, and with no further pretensions. I want it to be a very simple thing, because I consider that if you have a nice concept like this, which I think is nice, obviously, things work by themselves, and it's simple, and most of people, you don't even have to explain how it works. They automatically understand what one of these time lapses, what the concept is.
Well, you definitely have own subconscious feeling of what it is and what you're looking at. And it's actually interesting that you was mentioning that you looking at it more as a scientific experiment, because the aesthetical value for me is much more apparent than scientific part.
Well, it's not exactly a scientific, you know, I don't have a scientific training or anything, but for example, I remember I was doing a show in Chicago, and a professor from the sociology in the university, I don't remember which university exactly, he actually took a couple of pieces and he was going to work with them in his class. He was saying, of course there's not a scientific basis on this, but you still can work, can use it. You can see some sociological features on the images.
Well, it's actually quite understandable that the professor would see scientific value in it and would understand how it can be used for the purposes of his class. But yet again, it's for me at least aesthetically, it makes much bigger impact, and that's probably why everybody understands it. That actually brings us to another very interesting question, which probably was an episode on its own, how art and photography specifically helps people to understand the world better, not by just showing it, but showing it in a way that understood intuitively, not just on a logical level.
Yeah, so I consider art like I couldn't be working in something that doesn't have the creative component at all. I think it's essential for society. No, it's I think what makes us in everything, in business, in music, in photography, and just normal people, is this sense of generosity and collaboration, which are two of the core characteristics of art. And I think, especially these times, in schools, I'm talking about schools like primary schools, art is essential across the board and should be integrated in across the disciplines. That's my idea.
Well, in the older days, everybody who would be doing anything requiring skills would be called, as they say in Old Dong, practicing art of, put it in. So that understanding was actually for a very long time around. We just probably lost it in a way. But indeed, everything have to have an art component, and it's very exciting that we actually can get something like this to be happening. So, getting back to what I was hearing before, you mentioning collaboration. Are you considering your works in a way collaboration with your models?
Well, the whole point of my works is that they have to be like, let's say, candidates. Actually, I need to check the law in every country that I go before I shoot, in terms of, because I'm using this for commercial, it's a commercial use. I'm exhibiting it in galleries and fairs and selling it. So I need to check if I can use my images of people shooting in a public space. But the thing is that I'm not really shooting the people itself. No, you can actually recognize the figures, the profiles, but not the figures themselves.
So, faceless people, we'll talk about it after the break.
Welcome to Single Trick at Single Shot. Today we're going to be talking about switching from digital to film. A lot of people do nowadays, and if you decided to do that, either just to try or as your conscious decision to switch altogether, there will be a lot of things you will need to learn and a lot of things you will need to change in the way you photograph. But there is one thing that is very important, and you will really have to know it in order to avoid major disappointments. In digital, as you probably know, if you take a photograph, you really have to make sure it's not overexposed. Otherwise, there is nothing you can do. In RAW, white is always white. You can't change it. In film, on the other hand, overexposed image can be corrected through development of the negative, but underexposure sometimes is completely fatal and final. So just make sure that you will change it underexposure for overexposure.
Back. So we was talking before the break about the role of individual in those works. In one way, you are preserving individuality of every person pictured on those works, but on the other hand, they in a way becoming to be part of the uniform pattern. So in a way, their individuality being shared with the society. So
yeah, and that's very important, I think, because yeah, exactly what you said. Even though I'm taking pictures of individuals, mostly there can be some couples, sometimes, or small groups. What is important in my time lapses is actually the concept of the collective, how it works in a collective. But this collective is actually formed by individuals, which are the ones who give the soul to the big picture, and I think that that's something important in society. You know, so, being aware that it's formed by individuals, but at the same time, the collective pictures give us a better sense of our idea. In this case, of what I'm trying to project, which is a city, or a place.
Well. The whole civilization, if you think about it, every civilization, both good and evil, the ones that lasted for long and the ones that didn't, all was based on one other form of balance between value of individual and value of the collective. So this work's actually presenting very balanced depiction of this, and I wonder if you as an artist feel the difference between the role of collective in different places where you was photographing, especially by looking at different works.
Yeah, absolutely. And for example, when I'm in a place, I'm looking for a very specific individual, but also for a very specific collective. To give you an example, the work I did in Lisbon, in Portugal, I was trying to do it in a neighborhood which was crowded with tourists. As a collective, no, they were crowded with tourists, but that wouldn't reflect the city itself. So I had to move myself around the city till I found a working class neighborhood, and I took the picture next to a subway station where I had a lot of traffic of locals coming from work or going somewhere else, which was my idea. It was what I was trying, or what is basically what I'm trying to reflect when I do my pictures.
Well, so it's actually even more referring to photographing something in a way average, the individuals that are belonging to majority of the population of the city.
Yes, in general, what I'm trying to have in my picture is a sense of authenticity, that the individuals and the collective, after I mount the picture, have a sense of authenticity of the place where I'm shooting.
And was you ever considering making the similar time lapse for community which have some unusual and distinct properties that is kind of secluded? Just to give an example, Amish is one of those communities. They're not very fond of being photographed.
Yeah, that would be a problem. Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, I do that. For example, in London, I did 2 or 3 different ones. One in the financial district with, but all the people were exactly the same. They were wearing suits, white shirts, and then I did one in Soho, London, and in the afternoon when everybody was going to hang out or have a drink or everything, and it was completely different. You know, the way they dressed, they were already in a casual wear and anything. But that's something implicit of the cities as well, and of the communities. No? You can never get rid of that. And when I go to a city, I try to go some days before, walk around the city, talk to people, get a sense of the neighborhoods, what's going on in this part of the city, that part of the city. But then there's also technical issues. I need to find a background which is flat, as in no inclination, so I can put, and also has to say something to me, and I can put it one next to each other in a way that work. It's, so on one side, it's this idea of trying to reflect the collective as truthful as you can, and on the other side, you have the technical limitations.
Well, the technical approach is actually very liberating in a way. It's so simple that it allows you to implement it in virtually any city, any place.
Yes, but it takes me a long time because, as I mentioned, it has to be a flat, as no inclination wall that says something to me, beautiful, let's say beautiful or attractive. And there's a lot of attractive walls that are not flat, and there's a lot of flat walls that are not attractive. For example, in London, I walked 80 miles in 5-6 days till I found the perfect place. Then I had to come back one day when I found the place and check the light in the morning, in the evening, in the afternoon, seeing which one is the moment that's going to work better. And then next day I go, once I decided in what moment I can shoot, and then I shoot the pictures.
That's actually another interesting question, talking about time. Since this process is happening in time and it takes a significant amount of time, does the light difference affect the final result? Because they seem to be photographed in approximately the same light, at least with the ones I've seen myself.
It's I don't care too much about the difference in light, for example. You see different moments. Normally the time lapses that I shoot happened in between 1 and 3, 4 hours, depending on how crowded or busy is that street of that corner of the world. But for example, I took one here in New York, in Soho, and it was a cloudy day, so the sun was coming through the clouds sometimes, and it was 5 minutes later it was completely covered. So I have like one person overexposed, one person underexposed, and I just place one next to each other. I don't really care that you can notice there are different pictures or there's changes of light. I actually think it works aesthetically too.
Well, it is part of the time progression.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And also, speaking of time, I mean, time is important in my work, because what I'm doing is a moment. It's a photography of a moment. But also, I'm planning to come back to those places where I took the pictures in some years, probably 10 years. So 2021, I will be back to the place where I took the first one and do it again. So you could probably see also differences on people, you know, 10 years.
10 years.
For example, let me tell you something, that the ones that I took at the beginning, in the first years of this project, you can barely see people on their phones.
Oh yeah.
In the
That's
last
the
ones I took, it's believe me, it's crazy.
You can barely see people without.
You can barely see people without. And then I realized that I do that. You know, I walk on my phone very often, and but it's amazing the amount of people that walk watching their phones. Amazing.
Well, that's also one of the biggest changes in general that happened, that affects photography in many ways, not only because half of the modern street photography in fact becoming to be photography of people staring at the phones. I notice it in my own photographs all the time.
Yes.
But again, if you're coming back 10 years, you would see people on a train actually either reading something from a physical book or newspaper, or showing expressing a lot of anticipation of things. Now everybody is just staring at the rectangle indeed.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a second break coming. So after this break, we'll have few minutes to round up this.
Absolutely.
Hello, Alex AG from Single Shot is here with yet another single trick. Today I want to tell you about front aperture. Everybody for some reason believes that aperture have to be in the middle of the lens, and I did so also. But at one point I've seen on eBay lenses that was actually made with aperture in front of them for conspicuously, and I started to look into it, and indeed you can have a lens that works just like this. Basically have it right in front of it, and it doesn't affect the way photograph is appearing. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's actually the truth. But what is useful about it, if you have a piece of paper with shape in it, you can put it in front of the lens, and your highlights will be right in the shape of what this piece of paper is. Single trick, watch us on YouTube.
We're back, and as I was asking you during this break, there is, as I understand, a show coming in our very own New York City in which your works will be participating. So which one would be?
Well, it's actually an art fair that happens in Brooklyn. It's a very nice art fair that happens in Brooklyn twice a year. It's called The Other I've Heard. I think we met there,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly where
And
I originally met you. Yes.
So it's I'm gonna do it in May. I think it's the first weekend in May. It's very nice because it's this kind of art fair where the artist is actually in the fair, so you can actually talk to them. I really love that fair because not only you get to expose your work and everything, but you get to know a lot of interesting people, artists, and people like you, of course.
Well, those art fairs which are based actually on individual artists, not the galleries, in a way reminded me of your work.
Yeah.
It's a collective with every individual have immense value, but still being put together into something larger.
And there's something interesting about that. For me, it means a lot to be able to explain my work personally. I don't think anybody can explain it. If the person who comes to my stand and look at my work need an explanation, I really love the conversations, the things I learn, because I learn a lot. And also I think for the people that come to these kind of shows, it's also very good to get to know the artist and get an explanation directly from him or her.
Well, that's part of why those shows are happening.
Yes.
It actually provides this sense of continuity.
Yes.
So, wow, those works I definitely will try to make to the next other art fair, if not for any other reason, just to see your works yet again printed and large. And your works, on the side of everything, are the ones that actually need to be seen in real size, the ones in the size they printed, just because this amount of detail and this amount of small individual differences between one part of the image to another are really requiring you to see them all together as one.
Yeah, I think so. Completely agreed. Yes, it is important. I print big sizes, and it really makes a difference with the quality of the fine art paper, and it's completely different. Right?
So paper is your choice of medium, the preferred choice.
Paper is my choice of medium, and then I mount them with acrylic face, with an acrylic face mounted, and that's how mainly I print.
Wow. So, unfortunately, our time is up, and it was a beautiful conversation. We will be looking forward for your next exhibitions, and keep an eye on you. Thank you very much, Xan.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark for Roundtable. Thanks for watching. See you next week.